here. Para 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 Welcome back on my Twitch for another audiobook. We continue Quag. Today I'm blessed by light. I'm an angelic man now. Okay, so an angelic man with messy hair. Anyway, we're here to continue part 4 of Quag. Part 4 of Quag, the first novel ever written of Dungeons and Dragons. In the previous part, we see our company of heroes being hired by Istaspes, a wizard of Grey Oak, for a mysterious mission against an unknown enemy. Our company is composed by 7 heroes: a swordsman, the protagonist Milo Yegon, a berserker, a werewolf berserker with a pseudo-dragon as a companion, Niall Fangtooth, a swarm maiden Yvili, a rogue elf Ingrid, with a very hard name to say in an audiobook, a cleric, Divdine, if I remember that correctly, a bard, Wynard, I think, and a lizardman, Gould, or Gault. It's a bit messy. Then, last time, they start their journey south, and we continue from there with chapter 6. Chapter 6. Those who follow. A sip of water before we start. Verify if I... Chapter? Okay, chapter. Okay. I listen one word and I listen in error by me. Very good. So, chapter 6, Those Who Follow. Twilight dim drew a dark curtain without. Now Gould heaved up from his place a little behind the rest of the company. His clothes settled his belt, the only clothing that he wore, more firmly about him. From it hung a sword, not of steel, which in the darkness of his homeland might speedily rust away, but a weapon far more wicked-looking, a length of heavy bone, into the sides of which had been inserted ripping teeth of glinting opaline spikes. He had also a dagger nearly as long as his own forearm, more slender than the sword, sheathed in scaled skin. But his own natural armament of fang and claw were enough to make any foeman walk warily. Now he missed out in the common speech, "I guard!" Niall half heaved himself up as if to protest the lizardman's calm assumption of that duty. His scowl was as weak as it always was whenever he chanced to glance at Gould. Wymark, the bard, had risen too, his shoulder so forming a barrier before the berserker. Even though the bard was by far the slighter man, yet the move was so deftly done that Gould had become one with the twilight before Niall could intercept him. "Snakeskin!" Niall spat out. "He has no right to ride with a real man." Afrita writhed about the berserker's throat, where her bed had been tucked comfortably under its chin, swung out her snout, opened slits of eyes, and hissed. Straightway, Niall's big hand arose to scratch, with a gentleness foreign to his thick, calloused fingers, the silvery underpart of her tiny jaw. Guilt wears the bracelet, Milo pointed out. It could well be also that he likes us, and our company as little as you appear to care for him. Care for him? Exploded Neil, tethered with the filth of chaos. Tethered with the filth of chaos they are, most of his kind. My shield brother was struck down and torn to pieces by such a half a year gone when we ventured in the Troilan swamps. That was a bad business, and I'm like never to forget the stink of it. What if it does wear the bracelet? The Lucifer claim to be neutral, but it is well known they incline to chaos rather than the law. Perhaps, Yveli said, they find their species do not get an open-handed reception from us. However, Milo is right. Guilt wears the bracelet. Truth that is one with us. Also, the geese holds him. I do not like that, or him, Neil grumbled. Wymark looked. As you have made quite plain, Berserker. Yet you are not wholly adverse to all of the skilled kind, or you will not have Afrita with you. Afrita is the pseudo-drago, sorry. I didn't say that. Neil's big hand covered part of the small flying reptile, as if the bird had threatened her in some manner. That is different. Afrita, you do not yet know how well she can be eyes. Yes, and ears for any man. Then, if you trust her, but not guilt, Milo suggested, why not set her also to watch? Let the guard have a guard. Wymark's look was hearty. Common logic well stated, comrade. I would suggest we choose to exercise our smaller fears and suspicions and let Deep Dying get on with what he will do. The learning of what kind of force our comrade here has wedded to his hands. Milo felt that neither wanted to refuse. Reluctantly, the berserker held out his hand, and Afrita released her hold about his throat, to step upon his flattened palm, her wings already spreading and aflutter. She took a small leap into the air, soared nearly to the roof of the rock over their heads, then was gone after guilt. The cleric had paid no attention to them. Instead, he knelt by the same patch of earth on which Ingrid had drawn the map, and was now busy emptying out the contents of the overlarge belt pouch that he wore. He did not erase the crude markings the elf had made, but around them, using a slender wand about the length of palm and outstretched mid-finger, he began to sketch runes. Tug Milo found stirring in his mind knowledge of at least 2 written scripts. These resembled neither. A quick reminder, the last time we discovered that Milo have 2 magical rings at his hands, so the cleric wants to discover what these rings do. As he worked, Dev Dine, using the dry and the authoritative tone of a master trying to beat some small elements of knowledge into the heads of rather stupid and inattentive pupils, explained what he did. The word of him who knows, this set about an unknown, draws his attention to it if he chooses to enlighten our ignorance. Then such enlightenment is his choice alone. Now, at least this is not of chaos, or the word could not contain it intact. The markings will be wiped away. So, let the rings now approach the world, swordsman. His command was so sharply uttered, Milo obeyed without question. He held his 2 thumbs in the air above those scrolls on the earth, feeling slightly foolish, yet apprehensive. Divdine was certainly not a wizard, but it was well known that those who did serve their chosen gods with an undivided heart and mind could control power, different of course from that which Istaspes and the rest of the adepts and wizards tapped, but no less because of that difference. Running his prayer beads through his fingers, the cleric began to chant. Like the symbols he had drawn, which were without meaning to Milo, so were the words Milo was able to distinguish, slurred and affected as they were by the intonation Divdine gave them. But then, the ritual the cleric used might be so old that even those who recited such words to heighten their own trained power of projection and understanding did not know the original meaning either. Having made the complete circuit of the beads on his chain, Divdine slipped it back over his wrist, and picked up from where it lay by his knee the same rod with which he had drawn the patterns. Leaning forward, he touched the tip of it to the map ring. Milo heard Iveli give a gasp. The rod took on a life of its own, spinning in Divdine's hold until he nearly lost it. Quickly he withdrew. There were drops of sweat beading his high forehead, rising on the shaven crown of his head from which his scowl had fallen. Mastering quickly whatever emotion had struck at him, he advanced the rod a second time to touch the oval. The response this time was less startling. Tug the rod did quiver and jerk. Milo had expected some backlash to himself, but none came. Whatever power the cleric had tapped by his ritual had rested on him alone. Now Divdine settled back, returning the rod to his bag. Then he cocked up a branch, using it to wipe away the drawing. "Well?" Milo asked. "What do I wear, then?" There was a glazed look in Divdine's eyes. I do not know." His words came as if he spoke with great effort, and only because he must force himself to utter them. But these are old. Walk with care, swordsman, while you wear them. There is nothing of evil in them, nor do they incline to the law as I know and practice it. Maybe another gift from our bracelet-bestowing friend, perhaps? Waymark asked. No. If Istapes spoke true, and by my instinct he did, that which has brought us here is alien. These rings are of this space, but not this time. Knowledge is discovered, lost through centuries found again. What do we know of those who built the 5 cities in the Great Kingdom, or who worshipped on owns in the fane of wings? Do not men ever search for the treasures of these forgotten peoples? It would seem, swordsman, that this Milo Yegon, who is now you, was successful in such questing. The ill part is that you do not know the use of what you wear, but be careful of them, I pray you. I will be better, I think, Milo returned, to shell them into this fire, where I am only able to get them off. But that freedom seems to be denied me. Once more he had pulled at the bands, but they were as tight fixed as if they were indeed a part of his flesh. Waymark looked for the 3rd time. Comrade, look upon the face of our friend here, and see what blasphemy you have mouthed. Do you not know that to one of his calling the seeking out of ancient knowledge is necessary to maintain his very life, lest he fade away like a leaf in winter, having nothing to sharpen his wits upon? Such a puzzle is his meat and drink. And what is yours, bard? Snapped Divdine waspishly. The playing with words mated to the strumming of that harp of yours? Do you claim that of any great moment in adding to the knowledge of man? Waymark lost none of his smile. Sorry, I have to read more slowly. I know. I try to do it. Do not disdain the art of any man, cleric, until you are sure what it may be. But, in turn, I have another puzzle for you. What do you see in the flames, Divdine? Milo guessed that it was no idle question. Reader, it carried import unknown to him. The irritation that had tightened the cleric's mouth for an instant or two vanished. He turned his head, his hand once more swinging the chain of his prayer beds. Now he was staring into the fire. Ingrid, who had drawn a little apart during their delving into the mystery of the rings, came closer. It was to him that Neil addressed another question. "What of it, Ranger? You have certain powers also. This shaven addresser of gods is not alone in that. I do not rule fire. It is a destroyer of all that my kind holds dearest. For those of your kind can flee when such destruction hits upon their homes and trails. Trails escape not." He stared also at the leaping of the flames, as if they were enemies against which he had no power of arrow shot or chanted spell. Divine continued to stare at the flames, as intent as he had been moments earlier when he had attempted to use his knowledge of wand and rune. "What?" began Milo at a loss. Wymark raised a finger to his lips in warning to be silent. "They come!" Divine's tone was hardly above a mutter. A mutter. Mutter. I don't know. How many?" Wymark subdued his own voice. His smile vanished. There was an alertness about him, no kin to his usual lazy acceptance of life. "3, 2 only who can be read, for they have with them a worker of power. Him I perceive only as a blackness." As a blankness, not blackness, blankness. "They are of chaos?" Wymark asked. A shadow of impatience crept back into the cleric's voice. "They are of those who can be hated, but I do not see any familiar dark cloaking them." "How far behind?" Milo tried to keep his voice as low and toneless as Wymark's. His body was tense. Their mounts along the river guled. Was the lizardman a good guard? "A day, maybe a little less, to measure the march between us. They travel light, no extra mounts." Milo's first thought was to break camp, ride on at the best pace they could make in the dark. Then better judgment took command. Ahead lay another stretch of plain, perhaps a day's journey if they pushed. Then came a tributary flowing north. There was a second dry marsh after that, before the third stream, which was the one they sought, leading as it did into the mountains, enough below Geoff, so that they might avoid any brush with the fighting there. That particular stream was born of a lake in the mountains which capped the sea of dust itself. They had decided early that it would be their guide in among the peaks, where they might or might not be able to discover Lich's legendary lair. They are searching for a golden dragon by the name of Lich's. But the marches from one river to the next, those were the problem. Divine blinked, passed his hand across his withing forehead, and moved away from the fire. He reached for his bottle of water, newly filled from the river, took a long swallow. When I looked up again, his face was gaunt and drawn. Only what?" Milo wanted to know. "Only can His Christ offer us." Oh, sorry, wrong voice, sorry. It's Wymark, not Divine, sorry. Only can His Christ offer us, Wymark explained. Perhaps it was foolish to waste. No, I do not believe it is wasted. Our protecting wall of illusion is exhausted. Now we know that there are those who sniff behind us. We can well take precautions. 3 of them, 7 of us, Neil stretched. I see no problem. We have but to wait and lay a trap. One of them possesses true power, the cleric reminded them. Enough to mask it himself completely. Perhaps enough to provide them all with just a screen as has encompassed us through this day. But he cannot draw upon that forever, Yveli spoke for the first time. There is a limit to all, but what a true adept can accomplish. Is he an adept? Had they been an adept, Divdan returned, they will not need to cover the ground physically at all. And yes, the constant maintenance of any spell, especially if the worker has not all his tools close to hand, as did the wizard who drew us into this misbegotten venture, is not possible, but he will be gifted enough to smell out any ambush. Unless, the gears press on, it takes all his concentration and strength to hold the spell of an illusion. For the first time, Neil looked at her as if he really saw her. Though he had showed antagonism toward girl, he had refused to notice Yveli at all. Perhaps the near-giant berserker held also a dislike for Amazon clan forces. How much truth in that? He now rumbled, speaking at large, as if he did not quite know to whom of their party should best address his demand. It could be so, acknowledged the cleric. To maintain a blockage illusion is a steady drain of any spellcaster. With our illusion in turn broken, we shall be easy meat, Milo pointed out. Not only for an open attack, but for some spellcast. The way before us is open country. Therefore we must make some move to halt pursuit. Let Ingrid in the morning lead on with Divdine, Weimar, Guild, and we of this world wait? Yveli nodded. There are excellent places hereabouts to set an ambush. Milo protest against her being a part of it was on his lips, but died away before he betrayed himself. Yveli might be a girl, but she was a trained warrior, even as were he and the berserker. Though he did not deny that the other four of their party each had their own skills. He was uncertain as to how much those would matter in a business that was a well-known part of the battles he had been bred and trained to. Good enough, Neil responded heartily. Tonight we shall divide the watch. I go now to relieve Snakeskin. Milo would have objected, but the berserker had already left their improvised shelter. Ingrid raised his head as the swordsman moved to follow Neil. Words do not mean acts, comrade, the elf said. There is sorry, this part is poor written, so I can't read it. I do not. This is how it is written, the part, so it's not very readable. Against him is the only thing I can read. I don't know why it's written this way. So, Weimar nodded in turn. Devdine seemed to have sunk into a half-exhausted sleep, huddled beyond the fire. We are bound, the bard tapped the bracelet on his arm, so bound that each of us is but a part of a wall. That much I believe. That being so, we have each a strength or skill that will prove to be useful. He didn't finish, for Niall had returned to the fire, his lips snarling, so that the teeth which had given him his name were exposed nearly to their roots. The snake is gone. His voice was a grunting roar. He has gone to join them. And you're afraid? Milo asked in return. The berserker started. Then, holding out his hand at Alf, turning toward the dark without, he whistled a single ear-piercing sound. Out of the night came the pseudo-dragon, like a bolt from a crossbow. She was able to stop in midair, drop to the palm Niall extended. Her small dragon head was held high as she hissed, her tongue nickering in and out. Niall listened to that hissing. Slowly his face relaxed from a stiff mask of pure fury. Well, Wymark stopped to throw more wood on the fire, looking up over one shoulder. He was answered not by the berserker, but rather by a second figure coming out of the night. Gult himself stood there, his scaled skin glistening in the firelight, and water dripped from his snout. "In the river." Niall did not look at Gult, lying in that river as if it were a bed, just his eyes above level. Once more Milo's memory stirred and produced the fact he was not aware a moment before he had known. "But they have to have water. That swordsman swung to the leadman. He rode all day in the dry. It must have been near torture for him." He thought of the miles ahead with 2 more long dry patches to cover, must think of some way of helping Gult through that. Even as he struggled with the problem, Ingrid made a suggestion. "We can change the line of march, but this much upriver to the main stream. We shall have Yadocumbi and Faraz facing us at the border. But the river then will lead us straight into the mountains. And it will provide us with a sure guide as well as the protection of more broken ground." "Yadocumbi? Faraz? What frontier guards do they post?" Niall placed Afrita back to coil about his throat. Their reunited memories produced some facts or rumors, but they gained very little real information. They decided to take Ingrid's advice and use the river for a guide as long as possible. Niall tramped out again to take the watch. Milo wrapped in his cloak, settled for a little rest before he should take his room at Garth. They had all agreed to change the direct line of their march in the morning. They had also planned to set the ambush, or at least a watch on their backtrack. To learn the nature and strength of those trailers was of the utmost importance. Milo was aware of the ages of his body, the fact that he had been 24 hours or near dead without much sleep. He shut his eyes on the fire, but could he shut his mind to all the doubts, surmises, and attempts to plan without sure authority or control? It seemed that he could, for he did not remember any more until a hand shook his shoulder lightly and he arose to find Niall on his knees beside him. "All is well, so far," the berserker reported. Milo got up stiffly. He had certainly not slept away all day. Beyond the fire to which Niall must have added fuel for the other slept, the night looked very dark. He pushed past Wymark, who lay with his head half-pillowed on his bagged harp, and went out. It took some moments for the swordsman's eyes to adjust to the very dim light of a waning moon. Their mounts and the pack animals were strung out along their picket ropes a little farther north. Niall must have changed their grazing grounds so that they could obtain all the forage the small pocket in the riverland could offer. A wind whispered through the grass loud enough to reach Miles' ears. He took off his helmet and looked up into the night sky. The moon was dim, the stars visible. But he found that he could trace no constellation that he knew. Where was this world in relation to his own? Was the barrier between them forged of space, time, or dimension? As he paced along the lines of the animals, trying to keep fully alert to any change in the sounds of the night itself, Milo was for the first time entirely alone. He felt a strong temptation to summon up fragments of that other memory. Perhaps that would only muddy the impressions belonging to Milo Yegon. And it was the swordsman who stood here and now, and whose experience meant anything at all. So he began to work on that Milo memory, shifting, reaching back. It was like being handed a part of a picture. The rest of it is small meaningless scraps that must be fitted into their proper places. Milo Yegon, what was his earliest memory? If he searched the past with full concentration, could he come up with the answer to the riddle of the rings? Since Dane's discovery, he had moments of acute awareness of them, as if they weighed down his hands, so to cripple him. But that was nonsense. Only there were so many holes in that fabric of memory that to strive to close them with anything but the vaguest of fleeting picture was more than he could do. More than he should do, he decided at last. Live in the present, until they had come to the end of the quest. He accepted that all Istaspes had told them was correct. But there again, how much had the wizard influenced their minds? One could not tell, not under ages. Milo shook his head as if he couldn't shake thoughts out of it. To doubt so much was to weaken his own small powers as a fighting man. He knew powers that were not founded on temple learning or on wizardry, but on the basis of his own self-confidence. That he must not do. So, instead of trying to search out any past beyond that of his calling, he strove now to summon all he knew of the details of his craft. Since there was none here save the grazing animals to see or question, he drew both sword and dagger, exercised the drill of attack and defense, which his muscles seemed to know with greater detail than his mind. He began to believe that he was a fighter of no little ability. While that did not altogether banish the uneasiness, it added to the confidence that had ebbed from the affair of the rings. Dawn came, and with it Wymark, to send Milo into it, while the bard kept a last few fleeting moments of watch. As they settled the packs and made ready to move out, Divdine busied himself at the now blank ground, where last night he had worked his magic. He lit a bunch of twigs that he had bound into a small fagot, and with that he beat the ground, intoning aloud as he souffled the earth. Wymark returned, bearing with him newly filled saddle bottles. With a lift of eyebrow, he circled about the cleric. May it take more than that to waft away the scent of magic if they have a man of power with them, he commented dryly. But if it is the best we can do, then do it. The three who were to play a rear guard chose their mounts, the choice being limited for Neil because of his greater bulk. He could not hope for any great burst of speed from his, only the endurance to carry his weight. Were they not pushed for time by the Gias, he would better have gone afoot, Milo knew, for the Werkine preferred to travel so. As the line of march moved out, he, Iveli, and Neil waited for them to pass, moving at a much slower pace and searching with well-trained eyes for a proper setting where they might go into hiding. End of chapter 6. A brave intermission. I drink some water. Okay, let's continue. Chapter 7. Ambush. My legs hurt. Okay. Oh, yeah. They had ridden on for an hour before they found what Milo's second and stronger memory hailed as a proper place to set their trap. A place where the river banks sank and there was a thicket of trees stunted by the plains vines, but still barrier enough to cover them. 7 rode into the fringe of that thicket, and 4 with the pack train rode out again, Ingrid in the lead. Neil, Milo, and Iveli picketed their mounts under the roof of the trees and gave each a small ration of dried corn to keep them from striving to graze on the autumn-killed grass. The berserker waded through the season-shrunken flood to the opposite bank where there was a further edging of the growth and disappeared so well into that screen that Milo, for all his search, could not mark the other's hiding place. He and the battle maiden picked their own points of vantage. Waiting plucked at the nerves of a man, Milo knew that. Also, it could well be that they were engaged in a fruitless task. He did not doubt Davidine's seeing of the night before, but those who saw their party could have ventured on a straight way, and not upstream. Until, of course, they came across no further evidence of a trail. Then they would cast back action that would take time. Here, in the brush, he and Iveli were not under the wind, which carried a chilling bite. It blew from the north, promising worse to come. However, there was a pale showing of a sun to defy the grey clouding. 2 men, plus 1 worker of some magic. Milo spoke more to himself than to the girl. In fact, she too had withdrawn so well into the brush he had only a general idea of where she now rested. The man would be easy enough to handle. It was the worker of magic that bothered Milo. Nile, as well, and Berserker had certain spell of his own. Whether this could, even in part, counteract that dark blot Davidine had read in the flames was another and graver matter. The longer they waited, the more he hoped that their turn north upstream had indeed thrown the followers off their trail. He saw a flicker of color in the air, speeding downstream. Afrita, Neil, had released the pseudo-dragon. Milo silently raged at the rash action of the berserker. Any worker of magic had only to sight the creature, or even sense it, and they would be revealed. He knew that the berserkers, because of their very nature, were impetuous, given to sudden wild attacks, and sometimes unable to contain the rage they unconsciously generated. Ferrous Neil had reached that point and was deliberately baiting the trailers into action. Then Milo looked down at the bracelet on his wrist. There was a warrant there, a beginning stir of dice. He tried to shut out of his mind all else, but what the wizard had impressed upon them, that concentration could change the arbitrary roll of the dice. Concentrated it. Dice spoon, slowed. Milo concentrated. Another turn, another. So much he did achieve, he was certain, by his efforts. Moving with the utmost caution, the swordsman arose, drew his blade, broke his shield into place. Now he could hear sounds, clicking of hooves against the stones, and gravel of the shrunken river. 2 men rode into view. They bore weapons, but neither swords nor long daggers were at the ready, nor was the crossbow, strapped to the saddle of the second, under his hand. It would seem that they had no suspicion of any danger ahead. 2 men. Where was the third, the magic worker? Milo hoped that Nail would not attack until they learned that. However, it was Iveli who moved out. Instead of drawn steel, she held in her hands a hoop woven of grass. This she raised to her mouth, blowing through it. He saw her lips shape a distinct puff. There came a shrill whistling out of the air overhead, seemingly directed above the 2 riders. They halted, nor did the leader, who had been bending forward to mark the sign of any trail, straighten up. It was as if both men and mounts had been suddenly frozen in the same position they held at the beginning of that sound. Milo recognized the second rider, Helagret, the best dealer they had met in the marketplace in Grey Oak. His companion wore half armor, mainly mail. His head was covered by one of those caps, ending in a dangling streamer at the back, which might be speedily drawn forward and looped about the throat and lower part of the face. This suggested that his employment was not that of a fighter, but rather a skulker, perhaps even a thief. The crossbow was not his only armament. At his belt hung a weapon that was neither dagger nor sword in length, but between those 2. That he used it skillfully, Milo had no doubt. There was a limit to the spell Iveli had pronounced, Milo knew, but though they had so immobilized two of the enemy, which was an improvement on an outright ambush, there was still that third. Milo waited, tense and ready, for his answer to Iveli's action. Afrita was heard before she was seen, her hissing magnified. Now, with a bit of wings so fast that they could hardly be distinguished, save as the troubling of the hair, she came into sight, hung so for a moment, and was gone again downstream. Milo made a quick decision. If the spell vanished, surely Neil and Iveli could be with them handle the two men in plain sight. It was evident that the pseudo-dragon had located the third member of the party and was urging that she be followed to that once hiding place. The swordsman stepped out of concealment, saw the eyes of the two captives fastened on him, took even their expressions could not change, nor could they turn their heads to watch him. On the other side of the stream, Neil appeared, his axe swinging negligently in one hand, his boar-topped helm crammed so low on his head that its shadow masked his face. He lifted a hand to Milo and then pointed downstream. Apparently, the same thought had crossed his mind. As Milo twisted and turned among the rocks and bushes, so did the berserker keep peace with him on the other side of the flood, leaving Iveli to guard the prisoners. Seemingly, Neil had no doubts about her ability to do so. Had her spell casting answered to concentration on her bracelet, to giving it added force, Milo hoped fervently that was so. Neil's hand went up to signal a halt. That they were possessed senses he could not himself hope to draw upon, Milo well knew. He drew back into the shadow of one of the wind-tortured trees, watching Neil for all his bulk melt into a pile of rocks and drift. There was no sound of hooves this time to herald the coming of that third rider, but he was now in plain sight, almost as if he had materialized out of sand and rock. His horse was long-legged, raw-boned, as if it had never had forage enough to fill its lame belly. In the skull-like head it carried droppingly downward, its eyes burned yellow in a way unlike that of any normal beast. Nor did he who rode it guide it with any reins or bit. Seemingly, it strode downward without any direction from the one crouching on its bony back. The rider, the rusty robe of a druid, frayed to tread fringes at the hem, covered his hunched body. Even the cowl was drawn so far over the forward-poking head as to completely hide the face. Milo waited to catch the hint of corruption that nothing of the chaos passing this close could conceal from one woven too low. But the frosty air carried no stench. Still, this was not one of low ether. Now his beast halted without raising its head, and the cold-shadowed face turned neither right nor left. The druid's hands were hidden within the folds of the long sleeves of his shabby robe. What he might be doing with them, what spells he could so summon or control by concealed gesture alone, the swordsman could not guess. The stranger was not immobilized, save by his own will. That much Milo knew, and he was a greater danger than any man in full armor, helpless and weaponless. Tug he now looked. Afrita came into view with one of those sudden darts. Her jaws split open to their widest extent, that closed upon a fold of the cowl that she ripped back and off the head of the druid, leaving his brownish, bare scalp uncovered. His face writhed into a mask of malice, but he never looked upward at the now hovering pseudo-dragon, or made any move to recover his head. Like all druids, he seemed lost in years, flesh-hanging and thin wattles on his neck. His eyes shrunken beneath tangled brows that were twice as visible on his otherwise hairless skin. His nose was oddly flattened, with wide-spaced nostrils spreading above a small mouth expressing anger in its puckered folds. To Milo, the man's utter silence and stillness was more of a menace that if he had shouted aloud some runic damnation. The swordsman was more wary than ever of what those hands might be doing beneath the wrinkles of the sleeves. Afrita flew in a circle about the druid's head, hissing vigorously, darting in so does now, and then it would seem she planned to score the yellow-brown flesh, or sink her fangs into nose or ear. Yet the fellow continued to stare downward, nor did Milo see the least hint of change in either the direction of the eyes or the expression of the face. Such intensity could only mean that he was indeed engaged in some magic. The pseudo-dragon apparently had no fear for herself. Perhaps she shared with her great kin their contempt for humankind. But as she harassed the druid with purpose, Milo did not doubt. Perhaps the man showed no mark of it. His concentration on what he would do was hindered by the gadfly tactics of the small flyer. Out of the rocks Neil arose. All one could see of the berserker's face was his square jaw and mouth. The lips of that mouth were drawn well back to expose the fangs. When he spoke, there was a grunting tone to his voice, as if he hovered near that change which would take him out of the realm of humankind into that of the four-footed werewolf. "Currywolves, when did you crawl forth from that harpy's den you were so proud of? Or did the mage pry you out as a man pries a mussel forth from its shell? It would seem, by the look of you, that you have lost more than your snug hole during the years since our last meeting." Those unblinking eyes continued to hold their forward stare, but for the first time the druid moved. His head turned on his shoulder slowly, almost as if bone and flesh were rusted and firmly set, so that to break the hold was a very difficult thing. Now, with his head turned far to the left, he bent that stare on Neil. However, he made no answer. Neil grunted. "Lost your tongue also? Double in spells? It never served you too well, if I rightly remember." Now, while his attention was fixed on Neil, Milo leaped. He had sheathed his sword slowly, so as to make no sound. What he was about to do might well mean his life. But something within him urged his action, as if some fate worse than just death might follow if he did not try. He gained the side of the bony horse in that one leap. His mail-mittened hand arose, almost without his actually willing it, to catch at the nearer arm of the druid. It was like clasping an iron bar, as he swung his full weight to pull the arm toward him. By a surge of strength he did not know he could produce, Milo dragged apart those hidden hands. The druid did not lose his position on the horse. "Ah!" Now the head had swiveled about. The eyes tried to catch the swordman's. The other hand came into view, the sleeve falling back and away. It clawed with fingers that were nearer to long-nailed talons, swooped at Milo's face. His eyes, between him and that awful gaze, swept Afrita. The pseudo-dragon snapped at the descending hand with a faster movement than Milo could have made. A gash appeared in the flesh. Dark blood followed the line of it. The arm Milo still held jerked and fought against him. It was as if he strove to imprison something as strong as a North-forged sword governed by a relentless will. Afrita dove again at the other end. For the first time the druid flinched, not from the swordsman, but from the pseudo-dragon's attack. It was as if his will now looked on his other, smaller opponent. In Milo's grasp, the right arm went limp. So suddenly, he near lost his own balance. His hands slid down the arm, which was no longer crooked against the body, but hung straight, sleeve-hidden hand pointing to the gravel. From that hand fell an object. Milo set his foot on what the druid had dropped. That it was the other's weapon he had no doubt at all. "Milo, let go!" Just in time, he caught the berserker's cry and loosed his hold. There was a kind of dark shimmer, so close that he felt the terrible chill in the air which must have been born from it. Afrita shrieked and trembled, to catch her fore close in Milo's cloak and cling to him. He stumbled back. Where the druid and his horse had been, there was for one long moment a patch of utter darkness, deeper than any a lightless dungeon or a moonless night could show. Then nothing. Neil splashed back across the river. Afrita, gathering herself together, flew straight for him. Milo, recovering his senses, had gone down on one knee and was examining the ground. Had the druid pulled with him into that black nothingness what he had dropped? Or was it still to be found? What's to do? The berserker loomed over Milo. He dropped something. Here! Milo's hand darted forward at the sight of something black, dark enough in the gravel to be easily seen when he looked closely enough. Then caution intervened. He did not touch it. Who knew what power of evil magic, for it had been plainly meant to be used against them, was caught up in this thing. The force of his foot pressure had driven it deep into the sand and fine gravel. Now he grabbed at the fragment of driftwood nearby and gingerly began to clear it. 2 swipes of the stick were enough. It was a carving, perhaps as long as his palm had width. The thing was wrought as a stylized representation of a creature that was not demonic as far as he could judge, and yet held in it much of a menace. There was a slender body, a long neck, and a head no larger, almost the likeness of a snake, which was more mammalian than reptile. The thing's jaws gaped as wide as could Afrita's upon need. A small needle-like teeth appeared set within them. The eyes were mere dots, but the whole carving carried a suggestion of ferocity and fury. "The Urgaunt!" Neil's voice had lost some of its grunt. "So that was what that son of 1,000 demons would bring upon us." His axe swung down, slicing the carved thing into 2 pieces. As he broke it so, a puff of evil stench arose to make Milo choke. That carving had been hollow, holding within it rotting corruption. Once again the axe fell, this time flat-side, so that the 2 pieces broke into a scatter of black splinters, shifting down into the sand, lost except for a shred or 2 in the gravel. "What is it?" Milo got to his feet. He felt unclean, since first that stench had entered his nostrils. Though he drew deep breaths, he could not seem to clear his nose of its assault. "One of Carvol's toys." Though he had made a complete wreckage of the carving, Neil now stamped hard upon the ground where it had lain, as if to hide the very last of the splinters forever. "You knew him." "Well..." sorry, wrong voice. "You knew him?" "Well," growled the berserker. "When I was with the mage Wogan, we marched against the pinnacle of the Toad. That was..." He hesitated as if trying to recall something out of the past. "Some time ago. Time does not hold steady in my mind anymore. This Carvol's was not of the fellowship of the Toad. In fact, he had a reason to fear them, since he had pushed on their territory. He came crawling to Wogan and offered his service, mind you, to an adept, like a less fly offering to keep company with a fired wasp. Neil grinned sourly. He had not pledged himself to chaos, but he would have to save his own dirty skin. We all knew it. We also knew what he had in his mind. The Toad kind had their secrets, and he wanted a chance to steal a few. Wogan ordered him out of our camp, and he went like a hound well bitten. He dared not stand up against one so far above him in learning. We took the pinnacle. That was a tricky business. Wogan saw what lay within it, destroyed, giving chaos one less stronghold in the north. What Carvolts may have scrubbed out of the ruins. Anyway, this is beast magic. He summoned, or was summoning, death on 4 legs with that thing. Milo was already on the back trail. They had found and somehow between them confounded the druid. But what if he had joined the two evilly held? That fear sent the swordsman plunging along, no longer cautiously, but running openly. He heard the pound of Nail's feet behind him. The berserker must have been struck by the same tug. They came around a slight curve in the river to see the two prisoners still frozen on their mounts. Evilly leaned against a tall rock, her eyes fast upon the man. There was a bare sword, not a spell hoop, now in her hand. Milo todded on. He needed only to note the tenseness of her body to realize that the spell must be about to fade. Breathing fast, he came up to the right of the mounted man, while Nail moved in from the left. Will Carvolts suddenly also wink into view, even as he had vanished, to add to the odds? One of the frozen mounts bobbed his head and whinnied, I think. Milo, just as he had sprung for the druid, cocked at Helagret. Exerting strength, he pulled the man from his horse, dumping him to the ground, his sword out to point at the best tamer's throat in threat. He heard a second crushing thump and knew that Nail was dealing similarly with the other. Alagret's eyes were still afire with the fury they had shown when he was ensorcelled. Now, however, his mouth writhed into a sly parody of a smile, and he made no move. Evilly came to them, her own sword already. The other one? She asked. For the none's gone, Milo replied shortly. Now, fellow, give me one reason why I should not blood this point. Alagret's smile grew a fraction wider. Because you cannot kill without cause, swordsman, and I have yet to give you cause. You've tracked us. Yes, the other admitted promptly, but for no harm. Do you smell out of the dark forces about me or Naisho here? Sorry. We were bound to the service of him who follows us or did follow us. Mind bonds were laid upon us, since mine at least seemed to have vanished. Perhaps he is tired of display. Look at me, swordsman. My weapons are not bared. I was pressed into service since I know somewhat of this country. Naisho has other talents. Not magic, of course. There was only the learning of the druid. Milo backed a step or two. Throw your weapon, he ordered. Throw it yonder. Helagret obeyed. My dog cried out of the door. So wait a second. I don't know. Where are you, dog? Hello. Why are you crying? Okay. Sorry for the interruption. Helagret obeyed promptly enough, sitting up to do so. But evilly, oh, you want to? Oh, kink. Oh, yeah. No, wait, stop. Okay. We have a guest. Ciao. Che c'è da aver paura? Ciao. Okay. Can I go? Okay. Okay. Helagret obeyed promptly enough, sitting up to do so. But Evilly was at his back, her still near scratching his neck as he moved. A moment later, the weapon of Nail's captive also clattered out on the gravel. In spite of the cruel strength one could read in his face, he apparently was willing enough to prove his helplessness. "Why do you follow us?" Milo demanded. The beast tamer shrugged. "Ask no such question of me. As I told you, I know something of this land. When I refused to be recruited as guide by that shave-pate, he laid a journey spell on me. Already had Kinshaw bound to him in the same manner. But he did not share with either of us the reason for our journey. We were to be used. We were no comrades of his." Plausibly enough, and Milo was sure, at least half a lie. The glare faded from Helagret's eyes. It was plain he was putting much effort into his attempt to establish innocence. "A likely story," snorted Nail. It will be easy to wring the truth out of you." "Not," Evilly spoke for the first time, "if they are indeed Geas-bound." Nail peered at her from under the edge of his heavy helm. "An excuse, battle-maid, which can cover many lies." Yet she was beginning when, out of the brush behind them, arose a neighing that held in its stark and mindless terror. The two mounts of their captives shrilled in answer, wheeled and pounded in a mad stampede across the river, running wildly as the neighs from the woods rose in a terrible crescendo of sound. Helagret's face twisted in a terror almost as great as that of the animal. "Give me my sword!" he demanded in a voice that rose like a matching shriek. For the sake of the lords of law, give me my sword!" Nail's head swung around. He grunted loudly, and then his body itself changed. Axe fell to the ground, help and mail imprisoned. For a moment only another form. Then distinct in sight, a huge boar, near equaling in height the heavy horse Nail had earlier ridden, stood pawing the gravel, shaking its head from side to side. The red eyes holding now nothing of the human in them, only a devouring rage and hate. Milo jumped toward the woods. From the frenzied screaming of their horses, he knew whatever menace came was a threat of death. The horses must be saved. To be set afoot in this country could mean death. He had not quite reached the line of twisted trees when the first of the attackers burst into the open. It was plainly an animal near 8 feet long, 4-footed. Body, neck, and head were nearly of the same size. The black thing that he and Nail had destroyed was here in the flesh far worse than even the nasty carving had suggested. The creature reared up on stumpy hind legs, its bed darting back and forth as might that of a snake. The werebird charged as the thing opened a mouth that extended near the full length of its head and showed greenish fangs. Milo caught up his shield. His patchy memory did not recognize this creature. He was dimly aware that Evilly moved in beside him, her still as ready as his own. Their two captives had to be forgotten as a second serpent-like length of dull fur slittered out from them. The things were quick, and whether or not they had any intelligence, it was plain that they were killing machines. As the werebird charged, the first flung itself forward in a blur of movement almost too quick for the eye to register. But the boar was as fast. It avoided the spring by a quick dart to the left. One of its great tusks opened a gash along a stumpy foreleg. Then there was no watching of that duel, for the second creature leaped, leaving the ground entirely, and landed in a shower of sand and gravel, its head shooting out toward Milo and the girl. The thud of the strike against the shield nearly sent Milo off his feet. It shocked at its fetid odor. I don't know how to read it, so I jump it. The battle cry of the woman clans cut across the hissing of the creature. Milo trusted that weaving head. He scored a cut across its neck, but only knew by chance. He saw that Evil was lashing out at its feet and legs as it spun and darted. The swordsman strove to land a second blow on the neck, but the thing moved so fast he dared not try for anything now but the bigger target of the body. Then there came a warning cry. He looked around just as the third black head pushed through the thicket to his right. "Back to back!" he managed to gasp out. Evil, who had shouted that warning, leaped to join him. So standing, they each faced one of the Netmore Furies. End of chapter 7. And it ends with a climax, but we can still going because it's still early and I have more time. So let's advance with chapter 8. If I can close the bottles of water, the bottle of water. Yes, this is my feet. You just see because I am on the bed. My study. I need to buy something to make professional readings. I think. So, chapter 8. Black Death Defied. Milo smashed his shield into the gaping, long-fanged mask of beast fury, at the same time thrusting with his sword. Then, out of nowhere, Afrita spiraled, darting at the bleeding head as she had when harassing the druid. The Hurgaunt drew back on his haunches. Its head swung up to watch the pseudo-dragon for an instant. Milo took advantage of that slight second or two of distraction, as had during their struggle with the master of these things. He launched a full-armed swing at the creature's column of neck. The steel bit shorted halfway through the flesh and bone. With a shriek, the Hurgaunt, paying no attention to its fearful wound, launched itself again at Milo. Two the swordsman brought up his shield swiftly, the force of its body striking against his bore him back. He felt Eveli stumble as his weight slammed against her. Claws raked around the edge of the shield, caught and tore the mail covering his sword arm, pierced the later shirt beneath, bit into his flesh with a hot agony. But he did not lose grip of his sword, nor had the fury of that attack wiped away the practiced tactics his body seemed to know better than his mind. Milo thrust the shield once more against that half-severed head, with strength enough to rock the creature. In spite of pain, which at this moment seemed hardly a real part of him, he brought up his sword, cutting down at the narrow skull. The steel jarred against bone, but did not stop at that barrier. He was a little amazed in one part of his mind at his success, as the besmeared steel cut deeper. Despite wounds that would have finished any beast Milo knew, the Hurgaunt was near to charging again. Now the swordsman's hand was slippery with blood until he feared the hilt would turn in his grip. Shelled up and down, he beat at the maimed head with crushing blows. The body twisted. Broken-headed, blind, the thing still fought to reach him. It might not be dead, but it was nearly out of the fight. Milo swung around. It had taken his full strength to play out that encounter strength that until this very moment he had never realized he possessed. Evilly weapon-wise as she was, how could she fare? To his surprise, the battle-maid stood looking down at a second heavy body. Implanted in its elongated throat was her sword. One forepaw had been severed. From the stump spattered dark blood to puddle in the gravel. Milo drew a deep breath of wonder that they had won. Almost he could not believe that. The raw fury radiated still by the dying creatures struck against him, as if they could still has fang and claw. As if they could still use fang and claw. I have the page number on the E, so I didn't saw it. The giant bore, its sides showing at least two blood-welling slits made by claws, nosed a pile of ripped skin. The Urgaunt evilly had downed snapped viciously as the battle-maid coolly drew her still free of its body. She avoided a small lunge which sent the blood pumping faster from the wounds, and used the edge of her weapon, striking full upon the narrow head with two quick blows. But even then the thing did not die, nor was Milo's own opponent finished. Only the torn body the were-boar had shredded lay still. The boar trotted to the water's edge. For the first time Milo remembered their captives. Neither man was in sight, and their weapons were gone from where they had thrown them. He swung around to look into the fringe of trees. The crossbow had vanished, still trapped to the saddle of the horse that had fled, so they need not fear any silent bolt out of cover to cut them down. Where? Milo turned swiftly at that warning. Neil fainted, not the boar, stood there once more, his axe in his hand, but his warning had been needed. The mangled thing Milo had took in the throes of that which should have been dead was gathering its body for another spring. Axe ready, upraised, the berserker advanced a couple of strides. His weapon rose and fell twice, shorting both heads from the bodies. As the last flew a foot or so away from the fury of that blow, Nail gave an exclamation and one hand went to his side, while Milo was aware that his sword arm now burned as if a portion of it had been held in the flames of an open fire. "Marked you too?" The berserker gazed at Milo's mittened hand. Blood showered in a rusty rim about the edge of that mitten. "This beast," he kicked the head he had just parted from the body away from him, "may have some poison in them. So they are gone, huh?" He had apparently noted the absence of their prisoner also. Evilly answered him, "To be set afoot here is no fate I would wish on any, even of chaos." Milo remembered the screaming of their own hidden horses which had alerted them to the attack. The tree might now be faced by an ambush in the net of trees, but it would be well to find their mounts and ride. Afrita had been dipping and wheeling out over the water, her racing sounding like self-congratulation at her own part in their battle. Now she came to Nail. He winced again as he raised his fist for her to perch upon, holding her near the level of his eyes. Though Milo caught no rumble of voice from the berserker, he was sure the other was in communication with his small companion. The pseudo-dragon launched from its fist, whirled upward in a spiral, and then shot off under the trees. "If those skulking cowards plan to play some game," Neil remarked, "Afrita will let us know, but let us now make sure that we are not also afoot." Milo wiped his sword on a bush and sheathed it with his left hand. It hurt to stoop and pick up his battered shield, on which most of the painted symbols had now been scratched and defaced. The fire in his arm did not abate, and they found that his fingers were numb. He worked his right hand into the front of his belt to keep the arm as immobile as he could, for the slightest movement made the flame pain worse. Grimly, he set his toe on something else, using a trick he had learned when he had marched with the adepts of Nam, that pain could be set aside by a man concentrating on other things. How much they could depend upon the pseudo-dragon's scouting he was not sure, but Neil's complete confidence in what he himself had seen this day when she had flown with intelligence and shrewdness to aid in their battles was reassuring. They cut through the trees to where they had left their mounts, only to face what Milo had feared from the first moment he had heard those screams. A sick taste rose in his mouth as he saw the mangled bodies. The Urgauns had not lingered at killing, but the mauling of unfortunate horses had been coldly complete. Not even their gear could be sorted out of that mass. The fate Iveli had not wished even on a sworn enemy was now theirs also. They were afoot in territory where there was no refuge, and how far ahead their comrades rode they could not even guess. Iveli gave one level-eyed glance at what lay there. There was a pinched line about her mouth, and she turned her head quickly. I see you, dog. What are you doing behind me? But Nail approached more closely, while Milo leaned against the trunk of a tree and fought his battle against admitting pain into his mind. The berserker gave a snort of disgust. "Nothing of the supplies left," he commented. "We are lucky there is the river. Now we had best be on the move. There are scavengers who can chant such feasts." Milo only half heard him. Along the river, yes. It was to be the guide of their party north, and at least they would not go without water. Water, for a moment the fire in his arm seemed to touch his throat. He needed water. What if, he forced the words out, there were more than 3 of those things? "If there had been, we would already know it," returned Nail. He ran his fingertips with an odd gesture, as if he feared to really touch down his side. "They do not hunt singly, and since the druid summoner is ground to dust, he cannot call them down upon us again." Milo stood away from his tree. "Back to the river, then." He tried to get the right note of purpose into his voice, but it was a struggle. Nail's suggestion that the claws of those black devils might be poisoned ate into his mind. He had taken wounds in plenty, with scars on his body to prove it, but he could not recall any pain as steady and consuming as this before. Perhaps washing the gash out with cold water would give some relief. Twice he stumbled and might have fallen. Then a hand slipped under his arm, took his shield and tossed it to Nail, who cocked it in one fist, as if it weighed nothing. Iveli drew Milo's arm across a raw-mailed shoulder. Withstanding his short struggle to free himself, his sight grew hazy with each faltering step, and in the end he yielded to her will. He did not remember reaching the river, though he must have done so on his own 2 feet. Cold, fighting the heat of his wound, made him aware that his mail, his leather, and his linen undershirt had been stripped away, and Iveli was dripping water on a gash along his arm, from which the blood oozed in congealing drops. So small a gash, yet this pain, the lightness of his head, poison? Did Milo say that word aloud? He did not know. Iveli leaned down, raised his arm, held it firm while she sucked along the slash and spat, her smeared lips shaping no distaste for what she did. Then Nail, his great hairy body bare to the waist, gashes longer than that which broke Milo's skin visible near his ribs, loomed into the swordsman's limited field of vision. The berserker held his hands before him, cupped, water dripping from the fingers. Kneeling beside the girls, he offered what he so held. With no outward sign of aversion, she plucked out of the berserker's hold a wriggling yellow thing, hardly thicker than a bow cord. This she brought to Milo's arm, holding it steady until it gripped tight upon the bleeding wound. 3 more such she applied before settling the arm and the things that sucked the dark blood by his side. Then she set about doing the same for Nail, though it looked as if his skin was not so deeply cut after all, for there were only 2 or 3 patches of drying blood. Perhaps the boar's hide that Nail had worn during his change was even better than man-fashioned mail for defense. Milo lay still and tried not to look upon his arm or what fed there, draining his blood, their slimy lengths of bodies growing thicker. There was a shimmer in the air, and Afrita hung once more above them, playing down to settle her claws in the thick mat of hair that extended even upon the berserker's shoulder. Her long beaked head dipped and lifted as she hissed like a pot on the boils. "They are fools," Milo heard Nail's words from a kind of dream. "Not all men make their own choices. It may be that their master will have some use for them again, enough to see them out of the wilderness, but to take to the plain without food or water." Nail shook his head and then spoke to Evely. "Enough, girl. Those drow mouths are it plenty to do the work." He had 5 of the yellow things, mouth clamped to his wounds. Turning to the stream, he tossed those he still held in his hands back into the water. Then he approached Milo and leaned over, watching closely the wrigglers the swordsman did not dare to look upon, lest he disgrace himself by spewing forth whatever remained in his stomach. "Ah!" Nail sat back on his heels. "Say you dead now?" he demanded of Evely. Milo was unable to resist the impulse to look, too. The bodies of the wrigglers had thickened to double their original size, but one suddenly loosed its mouth hold and fell to the gravel, where it moved feebly. It was joined moments later by a second that also went inert after a space of 3 or 4 breaths. The other 2 remained feeding. Nail watched and then gave an order. "Use your snaplight, comrade. They will suck a man dry where they left. But their brethren have taken the poison. The wound is clean." Evely brought from her belt pouch a small metal rod and snapped down a lever on its side. The small spark of flame which answered touched the suckers one by one. The loosed fell and shriveled. Nail examined his own busy feeders. 3 followed the example of the drinkers of Milo's poison and fell away. At the berserker's orders, the battle-maid disposed of the rest. Milo became aware that, though he felt weak and tired, the burning he had tried so hard to combat was gone. Evely slit his shirt and bound it over the wound. Having first crushed some leaves, she went into the edge of the wood to find, soaking them before placing them directly on the skin. "The dying will have a healing spell," she commented. "With that you will forget within a day that you have been hurt." Divine was not here, Milo wanted to comment. Though he found himself somehow unable to fit the words together, he was so tired. They were without mounts, perhaps lost in this land. Then the questions slid out of his mind, or into such deep pockets they could be forgotten, and he himself was in a darkness where nothing at all mattered. He awoke out of the remnants of a dream that bothered him, for it seemed that there was a trace of some message which still impressed a shadow in his mind. Yet it drifted from him even as he tried vainly to remember. He heard a whinny and awoke fully. The horses, but he had seen those slain. If his hung above him, familiar, he strove to put a name to it. Why, Mark? Just so. Drink this, comrade. Milo's head was lifted, a pannikin held to his lips. He swallowed it. The liquid was hot, near as hot as had been the torment in his arm. But as its warmth spread through him, Milo felt his strength fast returning. He sat up, away from the supporting arm of the bard. There were horses right enough. He could see them over Weimark's shoulder, fastened to the fringed trees. How he was willing to lick the interior of the pannikin to gather the last of that reviving brew. Deep down did another seeing, having been able to renew his energy. I came back with mounts. Weimark did not even wait for him to finish his question. He sent the elixir too. Comrade, it is well that now we mount and ride. Though most of his shirt was now bandaged about his wound, his arm stiff and sore, but with none of the burning pain he had earlier felt, Milo was able, with the bard's help, to pull on once again the leather undergarment, even take the weight of mail. They were alone, and Milo, seeing that his sword was once more in sheath, his battered shield ready to be hung from the saddle, looked to Weimark for enlightenment. Evilly, Nail, he still had the old spells of detachment, almost drowsiness, as if he could not, or had not completely thrown off the effects of the poison. Have gone on, we shall catch up. The old boar, Weimark's face crinkled in what might be an admiring grin, is stouter than we. Comrade, he rode as if hot for another fight. But the river is a sure guide, and we must hurry, for there lies a choice ahead. Milos was ashamed of his own weakness, determined that the bard need not nurse him along. Once mounted, he found that his head did clear, even though he was haunted by the vague impression of something of importance he had forgotten. What choice? He asked as they trotted along the riverbank. There are watchers on the frontier. It would seem that the Yarokumbi, and perhaps even Faraz, is astir. Tug, would they watch for? Weimar shrugged. Yet it is not wise to let ourselves be seen. Milo could accept that. The disappearance of the druid came to him in vivid recall. Magic could meddle with the minds of unshielded men, make friends or the innocent into enemies to be repulsed. Ingrid urges we go back to the plains to the north. David Dine has rigged a protection for the skilled one, a cloak wet down with water, so he can stand the dryness of such traveling. We have filled the drinking sacks also. Ingrid leaves certain guide marks to take us west, while once more he scouts ahead. He swears that once among the mountains we shall be safer, but then there will be forest, and to the Helfenkind, forests are what stout defense walls are to us. They caught up with Ivali and Nail before night, and took shelter in the fringe forest. The battle-maid came to Milo, examined his arm where the close lash had already closed, and rewound the bandage, saying, "There is no sign of the poison. Tomorrow you should be able to use it better. We have indeed been favored by the homed lady thus far." She sat cross-legged, looking down now at the bracelet on her wrist. In a way, the wizard's suggestion works. When I laid the spell upon those skulkers, I tugged on this. She touched the dice with the tip of that overlong forefinger. And it is true, of that I am sure, they moved farther by my will. Thus the spell held the longer. "You cannot use that one again," Milo reminded her. "Yes, it is a pity. That was a good spell, but I am no follower of magic, nor a priestess of the Homed Lady. That more of the great heart be mine, I do not like." She now looked at him, and there was a frown line between her wide-set eyes. This druid will come vanish in a puff of smoke. There was nothing of the heart in the two held, only their own cunning strength. But the whom you fronted is a greater danger than near 100 of their kind could be. Still Nahil says he was not of chaos, when he knew him of old, or rather one of those who went from side to side in battle, striving to choose the stronger lord to favor. What lord has he found, if it be not one of the dark? Perhaps that, or the one we seek, Milo returned as he laced up his leather jerkin once again. He saw her shiver, and she moved a little closer to their small fire. Togi did not believe what chilled her came from the outside, but rather lay within. I have ridden with the three companies, she said, and do you know what quest I followed alone when these wizards swept us up to do his will? No one can lose fear, but it must be mastered and controlled, as one controls a horse with bit and bridle. I have heard the clan victory chants, and now her face was somber and set, of their defeats. We have gone up, sword out, our bowstring, against many of the creatures of chaos, but this is something else. Now she pulled her riding cloak closer about her, as if the chill grew. What do you think we shall find at the end of this blind riding, swordsman? Istaspe said it was not of chaos. I believe it, Tog. It could master even chaos. The Black Adepts and all we who are bound to their service. This being true, how can we prevail? Perhaps because in a manner we are linked to this alien thing, Milo answered slowly. His fingers ran along the smooth band of the bracelet. We may be these strangers' tools, even as the wizard said. The girl shook her head. I am under only one gaze, that set by Istaspes. We will know if another waited upon us. Up by down. Neil came close to the fire with his heavy tread. Once more Afrita lay, a necklet about his throat, only her eyes showing she was a living thing. Wymark had come with him to open a bag of provisions. They shared out a portion of its contents, then drew lots for the night watch. Once more Milo paced and looked up at the stars he did not know. He tried not to think, only to loosen his senses, to pick up from the word about him any hint that they were spied upon. Or perhaps about to be beleaguered by the unknown, that they had defeated the druid and that which he had summoned once was no promise that they could be successful a second time. Down skies were still grey when they rode on at a steady trot. It was close to noon when Wymark halted, pointing to a rock leaning against another on the far side of the river. We ford here. There is the first of the guides, as Ingrid promised us. There had been little talk among them that morning. Perhaps each in his or her own mind, thought Milo, was weighing all that had happened to them, trying to foresee what might lie ahead. The compulsion of the chaos set upon them never lessened. Another day they rode with only intervals of rest for their horses. Milo learned fast to watch for the twist of grass knotted together which pointed their way onward. One of them at each such find dismounted to loose the knot, smoothing out as best they could the marking of their way. On the third day, close to evening, even though they had not dared to push their horses too much, they came to the second tributary of the border river. A camp awaited them there, where the cleric and guild had pulled brush to make a half shelter. The clouds had broken early in the afternoon to let down a steady drizzle of rain, penetrating in its cold, but there was no fire for them. Guild lay in the open, moisture streaming from his skin. He watched as they rode up and picketed their horses, but they gave not so much as a grunt of welcome as they pressed past him into the shelter. Devdine sat cross-legged there, his hands busy with his prayer beds, his eyes closed in concentration. Respecting that concentration, they did not break silence, even among themselves. Milo had drawn his sword during their day's ride, and and used his arm over and over again, determined that he would be able to fight and soon. The wound still was bandaged, and there was an angry red scar, as if indeed fire had burned his flesh. But he was content that his muscles obeyed him, and the soreness his actions left could be easily ignored. They had settled down, sharing out food, when Divdine opened his eyes. He gave them no formal welcome. The elf has gone on. He seeks the mountains as a man dying of thirst would seek water, but his trail we can follow. It is in his mind that he can find some clue to the dwelling of leeches. His voice kept to a level tone. His voice kept to a level tone as if he gave a report. He has gone, but for a long moment he was silent. Something made Milo look away from him to the opening through which they had crawled. Gult shouldered his way in, but it was not the lizardman the swordman was looking for. Milo did not know what he saw. Still, there was something. We light no more fires. That fits them, the cleric continued. They must have a measure of light to manifest themselves. We must deny them that. Who are they? Growled Nail. He too slewed around to look without. The shadows, returned Divdine promptly. Only they are more than shadows. Though even my prayers for enlightenment and my crying cannot tell me what manner of manifestation they really are. If there is no light, they are hardly to be seen, and, I believe, so weak they cannot work any harm. They came yesterday after Ingrid the ridden forward, but they are no elfin work, nor have I any knowledge of such beings. Now they gather with the dark and wait. End of chapter 8. And for today is all. Next time, Monday, we will read chapter 9 and chapter 10. See you next time!